In the fog-choked gloom of 1935, St. Mary's Bell Foundry loomed over Ashford Hollow, its ancient crypt a vault of shadows and secrets. Foreman Elias Hawthorne, lantern in hand, descended into the damp darkness, the air heavy with bronze and decay. His boot struck something soft, a body. Reginald Blackwood, master Bellfounder, lay dead, throat slashed with chilling precision, a serpent-etched clapper clutched in his rigid hand. No struggle, no sound, only blood pooling on stone. Who breached this locked sanctum? As a distant bell tolled, dread whispered the killer was near and justice would ring. Chapter 1. The Echo of Death. The mist clung to the English countryside like a shroud, wrapping the village of Ashford Hollow in a spectral embrace on that fateful autumn evening of 1935. St. Mary's Bell Foundry, a hulking relic of industry perched on the edge of the village, loomed through the fog, its blackened stone walls glistening with damp. The foundry was a place of paradoxes, a crucible where molten bronze sang hymns of creation, yet its underbelly harboured secrets as old as the crypt beneath its foundations. The air carried the sharp metallic tang of cooled metal, mingling with the earthy decay of leaves, and from somewhere within, a faint hum persisted, an echo of bells long since rung. Elias Hawthorne, the foundry's grizzled foreman, trudged through the yard, his boots crunching on gravel as he made his nightly rounds. At 52, with hands calloused from decades of casting, he knew every creak and groan of the foundry as intimately as his own heartbeat. Tonight, however, an unease prickled at the base of his skull, a sensation he couldn't shake as he approached the heavy oak door leading to the crypt. The door, warped by centuries, groaned as he pushed it open, revealing a stone staircase spiralling into darkness. The crypt was a relic from the days when the foundry was a monastic workshop, now used to store ancient bell moulds, their surfaces etched with the wisdom of forgotten artisans. Elias carried a lantern, its flickering light casting jagged shadows that danced like spectres across the walls. He descended, each step echoing with a hollow thud. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the crypt itself were breathing. At the bottom, his lantern illuminated rows of moulds, their silhouettes looming like silent sentinels. He moved methodically, checking for signs of damp or damage, until his boot struck something soft, unyielding. A curse caught in his throat as he lowered the lantern, its beam trembling in his grip. There, sprawled across the stone floor, lay Reginald Blackwood, the master Bellfounder, his eyes wide in a rictus of shock. Blood pooled beneath him, a dark, viscous tide that gleamed like spilled ink in the lantern's glow. His throat bore a single, precise slash, clean as a surgeon's cut, severing life with brutal efficiency. In his rigid hand, clutched as if in defiance of death, was a fragment of a bell clapper, its bronze surface etched with an insignia. A coiled serpent, its scales glinting faintly under the light. Elias staggered back, his breath ragged, the lantern swinging wildly. "God in heaven," he whispered, the words swallowed by the crypt's oppressive silence. Reginald Blackwood was no ordinary man. He was the heart of the foundry, a craftsman whose bells adorned cathedrals from Canterbury to Cologne. His death here, in this sacred vault, was not merely a crime, it was a desecration. Who could have breached this forsaken place? The crypt was locked, accessible only to a trusted few. Elias himself, Blackwood's son Victor, his daughter Amelia, and perhaps the rival artisan Silas Thorne, though he had no business here. And why the serpent insignia? It was the Blackwood family crest, a symbol of pride but also of whispered scandals, tales of betrayal and hidden heirs that lingered in village gossip. The foreman's mind raced. He recalled Blackwood's recent demeanour, tense, preoccupied, muttering about debts repaid and old sins. Had those words been a premonition? Elias forced himself to look again at the body, noting the absence of struggle. No overturned moulds, no scattered tools. The killer had struck swiftly, with intimate precision, suggesting trust or familiarity. A glint caught his eye. A smudge of blood on the floor, trailing toward the shadows. He followed it, heart pounding, until it vanished near a stone wall. No exit, no passage, just the cold finality of the crypt. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the distant toll of a church bell, its mournful note slicing through the fog. Elias's nerve broke. He fled up the stairs, the lantern's light bobbing like a will-o'-the-wisp, and burst into the foundry yard, shouting for help. His cries pierced the night, drawing workers from their posts, their faces pale as they gathered around him. "It's the master," he gasped, voice hoarse. "Dead, murdered." Word spread like wildfire through Ashford Hollow, igniting fear and curiosity in equal measure. By midnight, the foundry was a hive of activity, lanterns bobbing as villagers whispered of curses and vendettas. The local constable, out of his depth, sent for Scotland Yard. But it was a telegram from Blackwood's widow, Margaret, that summoned a figure of legend, Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective whose reputation for unravelling the impossible had reached even this remote corner of England. As the village clock struck 1, a train whistle pierced the fog, heralding Poirot's arrival. He stepped onto the platform, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his moustache immaculate despite the journey. Inspector Japp, already on the scene, greeted him with a wry smile. "Poirot, you old fox, what brings you to this grim affair?" "The little grey cells, mon ami," Poirot replied, his green eyes glinting with purpose. "They demand exercise and a murder in a crypt. C'est magnifique." He adjusted his overcoat against the chill, his mind already turning to the puzzle ahead. At the foundry, Poirot surveyed the crypt, now cordoned off by Japp's men. The body had been moved, but chalk outlines and bloodstains remained, stark against the stone. Poirot knelt, examining the scene with meticulous care. The slash was clean, the angle suggesting a left-handed assailant. The clapper fragment, now bagged as evidence, bore the serpent crest, its edges worn as if handled often. "This was no robbery," Poirot murmured. "The killer left this symbol deliberately. A message, perhaps?" He questioned Elias, whose account was vivid but fragmented. "I saw no one, monsieur," the foreman insisted, his hands trembling. But the master was uneasy these past weeks. Spoke of enemies, debts, old grudges. Poirot's gaze swept the crypt, noting its isolation. The locked door, the single staircase, entry and exit were limited. Yet the absence of defensive wounds suggested Blackwood had faced his killer without fear. "He knew them," Poirot said softly. "A friend, a family member, a colleague. Trust betrayed." Outside, the foundry's great test bell hung silent, its rope swaying faintly in the breeze. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "This place, it sings of secrets," he said to Japp. "We must listen to its song." The suspects began to emerge, each with a shadow of motive. Victor Blackwood, the heir, was drowning in gambling debts, his inheritance a lifeline his father threatened to sever. Amelia, the delicate daughter, was entangled in a forbidden romance with Edward Lang, a journalist whose exposés had ruffled Blackwood's feathers. Silas Thorne, the rival bellmaker, harboured a grudge over stolen designs, his career eclipsed by Blackwood's success. And then there was the widow, Margaret, whose grief seemed tempered by a steely resolve. Had she known of her husband's darker dealings? As Poirot prepared to interview them, a servant approached, voice low. "Monsieur, a dagger's gone missing from the manor. Antique, serpent-carved. The master kept it locked in his study." Poirot's moustache twitched. A weapon, perhaps the weapon, now vanished. The plot thickened like the fog outside. The night deepened, and as Poirot stepped into the manor's Gothic halls, a sudden, unauthorized toll rang from the foundry's test bell. A deep, resonant knell that seemed to vibrate through the very stones. The household froze, faces pale. "Who rings it?" Japp demanded, rushing to the window. No one was there. The rope swung as if touched by a ghost. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The bell speaks, mon ami," and Hercule Poirot listens. Chapter 2. The Arrival of the Little Belgian. The fog over Ashford Hollow thickened as dawn crept across the horizon, casting St. Mary's Bell Foundry in a ghostly pallor. The village, nestled in the rolling hills of 1935 England, buzzed with whispers of the grim discovery in the crypt below the foundry. Reginald Blackwood's murder, a master Bellfounder struck down in his own sanctum, had ignited fear and fascination among the villagers. By morning, a crowd gathered at the foundry gates, their murmurs blending with the distant cawing of crows. The air carried the acrid scent of coal smoke from the foundry's chimney, a stark contrast to the damp earthiness of the surrounding fields. Inspector Arthur Japp of Scotland Yard arrived at first light, his sturdy frame cutting through the throng with practised authority. His weathered face betrayed a flicker of unease as he surveyed the foundry, its towering silhouette like a medieval fortress against the grey sky. Japp was no stranger to murder, but the crypt's isolation and the serpent-etched clapper fragment clutched in Blackwood's hand suggested a crime steeped in malice and mystery. He had barely begun organising the scene when a telegram from Margaret Blackwood, the victim's widow, announced the arrival of an unexpected ally. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective whose reputation preceded him like a fanfare. Poirot stepped off the 8:15 train from London, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the muddy platform. His overcoat, tailored to perfection, repelled the mist, and his moustache, meticulously waxed, quivered with anticipation. His green eyes sparkled with the promise of a puzzle worthy of his little grey cells. Japp greeted him with a wry grin, extending a hand. "Poirot, you old bloodhound, what brings you to this dreary corner of England?" Poirot bowed, his voice rich with a lilting French accent. "Mon cher Japp, it is the call of the unusual, the inexplicable. A murder in a crypt with a serpent's mark. C'est une énigme magnifique. Madame Blackwood insists on my presence, suspecting foul play beyond the ordinary, and Hercule Poirot, he does not disappoint." They approached the foundry, its iron gates creaking under a gust of wind. The structure loomed, its blackened walls scarred by years of molten bronze and ambition. Inside, the main workshop hummed with latent energy. Great furnaces dormant, bell moulds lined like silent soldiers. Workers milled about, their faces taut with shock, whispering of curses and old grudges. Japp led Poirot to the crypt's entrance, where a constable stood guard. "Body's been moved to the morgue," Japp said, "but the scene's untouched. Blood, chalk outlines, and that blasted clapper fragment." The crypt stairs descended into a chill darkness, the air heavy with the scent of damp stone and ancient dust. Poirot's lantern cast flickering shadows, illuminating the chalk outline where Reginald Blackwood had lain. The bloodstain, now congealed, spread like a dark halo across the floor. Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers tracing the air above the stain. "The cartage was precise," he murmured. No hesitation, no struggle. The victim, he faced his killer without fear. This suggests trust, intimacy, a friend perhaps or kin. He examined the clapper fragment, now sealed in an evidence bag. The serpent insignia, etched with care, gleamed faintly. "This is no mere ornament," Poirot said. "It is a message, deliberately left. The Blackwood crest, oui, but why this piece? And why in his hand?" Japp shrugged. His pragmatism clashing with Poirot's penchant for the symbolic, Elias Hawthorne, the foreman, was summoned. His hands trembled as he recounted finding the body, his voice rough with strain. "I checked the crypt nightly, monsieur. Never saw a soul. But the master, he'd been strange lately, muttering about debts, enemies from years past. Said something about the serpent's return. I thought it was just talk." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this crypt, it is locked always?" "Aye," Elias nodded. "Only me, the master, and maybe Master Victor had keys. Miss Amelia, too, though she rarely came here. And Thorne, Silas Thorne, the rival bellmaker. He's got no business down here, but he's been sniffing around lately." The suspects began to take shape, each with a thread of motive weaving through the tapestry of the crime. Victor Blackwood, Reginald's son, was a handsome man in his 30s, his charm marred by a reputation for reckless gambling. Word was that Reginald had threatened to cut him off, leaving the foundry to another if Victor's debts persisted. Amelia Blackwood, the daughter, was a fragile beauty, her life overshadowed by a scandalous affair with Edward Lang, a journalist whose exposés had targeted Reginald's business dealings. Silas Thorne, a burly artisan with a rival foundry, harboured a decades-old grudge, claiming Reginald stole his designs to build his empire. And Margaret Blackwood, the widow, was a figure of quiet strength, her grief tempered by an enigmatic reserve that piqued Poirot's curiosity. Poirot toured the foundry, noting its labyrinthine layout. The main workshop led to storage rooms, offices, and the crypt's sealed entrance. A narrow staircase ascended to the bell tower, where the great test bell hung, its rope swaying faintly. "Access is limited," Poirot mused. "The killer entered and left unseen, or they were meant to be here. We must consider the psychology. Why the crypt? Why not the workshop or the manor?" Japp produced a new clue. A servant's report of a missing dagger from the Blackwood Manor, an antique piece with a serpent-carved hilt, kept under lock in Reginald's study. "Could be the murder weapon," Japp said. "No sign of it in the crypt, though." Poirot's moustache twitched. "A weapon of significance stolen from the heart of the family. This is no random act, mon ami. It is personal, deliberate." The detective questioned the household staff, starting with Clara, a young maid with sharp eyes and a guarded demeanour. "The master was strict," she admitted, twisting her apron. "He dismissed my sister last year for no good reason. I stayed on, but I heard him arguing with Master Victor the night before. Something about money owed to dangerous folk." Victor, summoned to the manor's drawing room, paced like a caged lion. His tailored suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. "Father was a tyrant," he snapped under Poirot's probing gaze. "He called my debts a disgrace, threatened to leave the foundry to Amelia if I didn't reform. But murder? I was at the club in London. Ask anyone." Amelia, delicate in a lavender dress, clutched a locket as she spoke. "Papa disapproved of Edward," she said, voice trembling. "Called him a fortune hunter. But I was with Edward in London that night. My friends can vouch." Her alibi seemed solid, yet her eyes darted nervously. Silas Thorne, summoned from his own workshop, arrived begrimed with soot. "Blackwood ruined me," he growled. "Stole my designs, bribed the guilds. Motive? Plenty. But I was casting bells till midnight. My apprentices will swear to it. Poirot's little grey cells hummed. The victim's background unfolded through interviews. Reginald Blackwood, born to a modest family, had clawed his way to prominence, crafting bells that rang in cathedrals across Europe. His crypt visits were a ritual, inspecting heirloom moulds passed down through generations. The serpent crest tied to a family scandal. A rumoured bastard child disowned long ago. Was this the serpent's return Elias mentioned? A red herring surfaced. A bloody glove found near the crypt entrance, monogrammed with Victor's initials. Planted, Victor protested, his face flushing. Poirot nodded, sensing misdirection. The glove? It is too convenient, he said. We seek the subtle, not the obvious. As night fell, the manor's Gothic halls grew oppressive, shadows pooling in corners. Poirot retired to his guest room, his mind sifting clues. The locked crypt, the missing dagger, the serpent clapper. Suddenly, a scream shattered the silence. Amelia, standing at her window, pale as moonlight. "I saw someone in the foundry yard," she gasped. A figure cloaked, moving toward the bell tower. Japp and Poirot rushed outside, lanterns raised, but found only footprints in the mud, leading nowhere. As they returned, the test bell tolled again. Slow, deliberate, unauthorized. The sound reverberated through the fog, a chilling knell that seemed to mock their efforts. "Someone plays with us," Poirot said, his voice low. "But Hercule Poirot, he is not so easily toyed with." The night stretched on, the foundry's silhouette a dark sentinel against the stars. The detective stood alone, listening as the bell's echo faded, his mind alight with the first threads of a solution. The crypt held secrets, and he would unravel them, one chime at a time. Chapter 3. Shadows of Inheritance. The morning after Reginald Blackwood's murder dawned bleak over Ashford Hollow, the fog lingering like a mourner's veil. St. Mary's Bell Foundry stood silent, its furnaces cold, the usual clang of hammers replaced by an eerie hush. The village buzzed with speculation, whispers of curses and vendettas weaving through the cobbled streets. Inside the Blackwood Manor, a Gothic edifice of weathered stone and leaded windows overlooking the foundry, Hercule Poirot gathered the household in the grand drawing-room. The air was thick with tension, the scent of polished oak and wax mingling with the faint must of old secrets. Heavy drapes muted the grey light, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe across the ornate rugs. Poirot stood before the fireplace, its embers glowing faintly, his diminutive figure commanding despite its modesty. His green eyes swept over the assembled. Victor Blackwood, pacing with the restless energy of a man cornered. Amelia Blackwood, perched on a velvet settee, her delicate hands twisting a silk handkerchief. Margaret Blackwood, the widow, erect in a high-backed chair, her grief masked by stoic reserve. And Elias Hawthorne, the foreman, lingering at the room's edge, his calloused hands clasped nervously. Inspector Japp leaned against the doorframe, his notebook open, his expression one of weary pragmatism. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice smooth yet piercing, "we stand in the shadow of a crime most foul. Monsieur Blackwood, a man of renown, was struck down in his own crypt, a place of sanctity and secrecy. The serpent clapper in his hand, the missing dagger. These are not mere details, but threads in a tapestry of motive and betrayal. Hercule Poirot seeks the truth, and it begins with you." Victor halted mid-stride, his handsome face etched with agitation. His dark hair was dishevelled, his tailored jacket creased from a sleepless night. "This is absurd," he snapped, his voice sharp with indignation. "Father was a tyrant, yes, cut me off over my debts, threatened to disinherit me for my indiscretions. But murder? I was in London at the Raven Club, drowning my sorrows. Ask the barkeep. Poirot's moustache twitched. And yet, Monsieur Victor, your initials adorn a glove found near the crypt, stained with blood. A coincidence, perhaps? His tone was mild, but his gaze bore into Victor like a scalpel. Planted! Victor roared, slamming a fist on a side table, rattling a porcelain vase. Someone's framing me. I'd wager on Thorne, Silas Thorne, that bitter old fool. He's hated father for years. Amelia's voice, soft as a whisper, cut through the tension. Please, Victor, don't. She looked to Poirot, her blue eyes wide with distress, her auburn hair catching the firelight. Papa disapproved of my Edward, she said, clutching a locket that held a miniature of Edward Lang, her journalist lover. He called him a fortune hunter, threatened to expose him. But I was in London with Edward that night, dining with friends at the Savoy. They'll confirm it. Poirot nodded, noting her trembling fingers. Mademoiselle, your alibi, it is strong, but the heart, it can obscure the truth. Did your father know of your plans to elope? Amelia paled, her breath catching. How did you? No, he didn't. He'd have locked me away. Margaret Blackwood spoke for the first time, her voice steady but cold. My husband was a man of principle, Monsieur Poirot. He built this foundry from nothing, a legacy for our children. But he was not without enemies. His success bred jealousy, and his firmness bred resentment. Her grey eyes met Poirot's, unflinching. I was in my chambers that night alone. I heard nothing. Poirot turned to Elias, who shifted uncomfortably. And you, Monsieur Hawthorne? You found the body, oui, but what else did you see? Elias swallowed, his weathered face creasing. Just what I told you, sir. The master was dead, throat cut, that clapper in his hand. I locked the crypt after my rounds the night before. Nobody could have got in without a key. And yet, Poirot mused, someone did. The lock was not forced. This suggests a key. Or cunning. The detective's little grey cells churned as he pieced together Reginald Blackwood's background. A self-made man, born to a blacksmith's family. Reginald had transformed a modest workshop into a beacon of craftsmanship, his bells resonating in cathedrals across Europe. His visits to the crypt were ritualistic, inspecting heirloom moulds that bore the serpent crest, a symbol of pride, but also of scandal. Village gossip spoke of a disowned brother, a forger who vanished decades ago, and whispers of a bastard child tied to the crest. Had these ghosts resurfaced? Poirot's inquiries deepened. He learned of Victor's gambling debts, owed to a shadowy lender in London's underbelly. Men who did not forgive unpaid dues. Father said he'd settle it, Victor admitted reluctantly, but only if I left the tables. I refused. A motive, perhaps, but too direct for Poirot's taste. Amelia's affair with Edward Lang revealed further layers. Papa threatened to cut my dowry, she confessed, tears brimming. He said Edward was after the foundry's wealth. But Edward loves me. Her sincerity was touching, but Poirot noted a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Margaret's composure hinted at hidden knowledge. Reginald kept secrets even from me, she said. He'd been meeting someone in secret. Late nights, cryptic letters. I thought it was business. A red herring emerged. The bloody glove with Victor's initials, found near the crypt entrance. Japp produced it, sealed in a bag. Looks damning, he said, but Poirot shook his head. Too obvious, mon ami. The killer wishes us to chase shadows. Elias mentioned a new detail, a servant's report of an argument overheard in the foundry office days before the murder. It was Thorne, Elias said. He and the master were shouting, something about stolen designs and a lawsuit. Thorne stormed out, vowing revenge. Poirot filed this away, his mind turning to Silas Thorne. The rival bellmaker, a burly man with a temper, had built a modest foundry in the next village, but his bells paled beside Blackwood's. A motive rooted in professional jealousy was plausible, but did Thorne have the cunning for such a precise crime? The detective requested a tour of the manor, seeking clues in its opulent yet oppressive halls. The study, where the serpent-carved dagger had been kept, was locked, its key in Margaret's possession. "Reginald was particular about his artifacts," she said, unlocking the door. Inside, a glass case stood empty, the dagger's absence stark. "It was here 2 days ago," she insisted. Poirot examined the case. No signs of forced entry. "An inside job," he murmured. "Someone with access, or someone trusted." As the interviews concluded, the household dispersed, their alibis fragile as spun glass. Victor's London trip, Amelia's dinner, Margaret's solitude, Elias's rounds. All would be verified, but Poirot's instincts whispered of deception, of motives veiled by grief and propriety. Dusk settled, the manor's windows glowing like eyes in the fog. Poirot stepped into the garden, the air sharp with the scent of wet roses. He reviewed his notes. The locked crypt, the serpent clapper, the missing dagger, the glove. Each clue was a note in a discordant symphony, and he, Hercule Poirot, would conduct it to harmony. Suddenly, a scream shattered the evening's calm. Amelia, standing at the garden's edge pointing toward the foundry. "There," she cried, her voice trembling. "A figure in the shadows near the bell tower." It vanished into the mist. Japp and Poirot hurried to the spot, lanterns raised, but found only trampled grass and a single footprint, too smudged to identify. The test bell, silent since the previous night's eerie toll, hung motionless. "Another trick?" Japp growled. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Or a challenge, mon ami. The killer watches us, plays with us, but they do not know Hercule Poirot." As they returned to the manor, a low hum emanated from the foundry, a faint, unauthorized vibration, as if a bell had been brushed. The sound faded, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the weight of unanswered questions. The crypt's secrets were deepening, and Poirot sensed the killer was closer than anyone dared admit. Chapter 4. The Artisan's Alibi. The dawn broke over Ashford Hollow with a reluctant light, the fog thinning to reveal St. Mary's Bell Foundry in stark relief against the rolling hills of 1935 England. The foundry's chimney stood dormant, its usual plume of smoke absent, as if the very heart of the place had stilled with Reginald Blackwood's death. The village, still reeling from the murder in the crypt, whispered of omens. The unauthorized toll of the test bell, the shadowy figure Amelia claimed to have seen, the serpent-etched clapper clutched in the victim's lifeless hand. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the chill morning air, stood at the foundry gates, his impeccable overcoat buttoned against the breeze, his moustache a study in precision. Beside him, Inspector Japp adjusted his hat, his pragmatic demeanour clashing with the detective's quiet intensity. "Another day, another riddle, eh, Poirot?" Japp said, his breath misting in the cold. "That scream last night, Amelia's nerves or something more." Poirot's green eyes glinted. "The nerves, mon ami, they are a window to the soul. Mademoiselle Amelia sees shadows, but are they real or conjured by guilt? We shall see." His gaze drifted to the foundry's bell tower, where the great test bell hung silent, its rope swaying faintly as if touched by an unseen hand. "Today we visit Monsieur Thorne. His hatred for Blackwood burns bright, but does it burn with murder?" They set out for Silas Thorne's workshop, a modest structure in the neighbouring village of Wickham Green, a mile's walk through frost-kissed fields. The path wound past hedgerows and a crumbling stone wall. The air sharp with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. Thorn's workshop was a stark contrast to Blackwood's empire. Smaller, cluttered, its walls lined with half-finished bell moulds and tools gleaming under gaslight. The rhythmic clang of a hammer greeted them as they entered, where Silas Thorn, a burly man with soot-streaked arms and a scowl etched deep, pounded a glowing bronze casting. His apprentices, 3 young men with wary eyes, paused their work, watching the visitors with suspicion. "Monsieur Thorn," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the din, "Hercule Poirot seeks the truth behind a most tragic affair. You knew Reginald Blackwood well, no?" Thorn set down his hammer, wiping sweat from his brow. His eyes, dark and flinty, met Poirot's without warmth. "Knew him? Aye, and despised him. Blackwood stole my designs 20 years ago, bribed the guilds, claimed my innovations as his own, ruined me. But murder?" He barked a laugh, bitter as gall. "I'd rather outring him than slit his throat. I was here, casting till midnight. My lads'll swear to it." Poirot's gaze swept the workshop, noting the organised chaos. Moulds stacked haphazardly, a ledger open on a workbench, a fresh scar on Thorn's left hand, catching the light. "This wound, monsieur, it is recent, oui?" Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. Thorn flexed his hand, wincing. "Casting accident 2 days ago. Molten bronze don't care for carelessness." He gestured to a cooling mould, its edge jagged. "Ask my apprentices." The eldest apprentice, a lanky youth named Tom, nodded vigorously. "He was here, sir, all evening. Never left till we locked up." The others murmured agreement, but Poirot noted a flicker of hesitation in the youngest's eyes. A crack in the alibi. Perhaps Japp produced the ledger, flipping to a page marked with disputed patents. "You and Blackwood were at odds over these designs, Thorn. A lawsuit, wasn't it? Cost you a fortune." Thorn's jaw tightened. "Aye, and he won, as always. Paid off the right people. But that's old news. I've rebuilt, haven't I?" He gestured to a gleaming bell, its tone rich when struck lightly. "My work speaks for itself." Poirot's little grey cells whirred. Thorn's motive was clear. Professional jealousy, a career eclipsed by Blackwood's success. But his alibi held for now. The scar, though, nagged at Poirot. A struggle with Blackwood or truly an accident? He filed the detail away, his mind turning to the broader puzzle. Blackwood's will, recently revised, named Victor as heir to the foundry, but with a codicil. If Victor's debts persisted, Amelia would inherit a controlling share. A motive for Victor, perhaps, but also for Amelia, whose dowry was tied to the estate. And Thorn, a man scorned, might kill for pride, not just profit. Back at the Blackwood Manor, Poirot gathered new intelligence. Clara, the maid, reported a curious find. A handkerchief in Amelia's drawer, stained with what appeared to be blood. "I found it this morning, sir," she said, her sharp eyes darting to Amelia, who sat nearby, pale as porcelain. "It's Mr. Lang's. His initials are on it." Amelia sprang to her feet, her voice trembling. "It's not blood. It's ink from Edward's writing. He's a journalist, always spilling ink. Someone's trying to make him look guilty." Her defence was fierce, but Poirot noted her clenched fists, her gaze flickering toward the door. Japp examined the handkerchief, sniffing it. "Could be ink, could be something else. We'll test it." He bagged it as evidence, his expression sceptical. Poirot's mind raced. The handkerchief was a false clue, too conveniently placed, much like the bloody glove with Victor's initials. "Misdirection, mon ami," he said to Japp. "The killer sows confusion, but Hercule Poirot sees through the fog." The detective returned to the foundry, drawn to the crypt's oppressive silence. He retraced the scene, The chalk outline, the bloodstain, the absence of struggle. The serpent clapper suggested a personal vendetta, tied to the Blackwood crest and its scandals. A servant had mentioned Reginald's cryptic mutterings about the serpent's return. A reference to the disowned brother, perhaps, or a metaphorical debt. Poirot's methodology was meticulous. He cross-referenced alibis, noting Victor's London trip, unverified, Amelia's dinner confirmed by 2 friends, and Thorne's workshop presence, partially corroborated. Margaret's solitude in her chambers was unprovable, and Elias's rounds placed him near the crypt at the critical hour. A new clue emerged as Poirot inspected the foundry's ventilation system, a network of iron grates connecting the crypt to the surface. Kneeling by a grate, he heard a faint whisper. Words indistinct, carried on the wind. Ventriloquism or a hidden presence? He tapped the grate, noting its loose bolts. "Someone has tampered with this," he said to Japp. "A way to listen or to speak?" Japp frowned. "You're saying the killer was spying or signalling?" "Perhaps both," Poirot replied. "The crypt is a stage, and the killer directs the play." The day waned, the manor's Gothic silhouette looming against a crimson sunset. Poirot interviewed Edward Lang, who arrived from London, his journalist's charm masking a defensive edge. "I loved Amelia, not her father's money," he insisted, his dark eyes meeting Poirot's. "Blackwood tried to ruin me, threatened to expose a story I wrote years ago, but I was with Amelia at the Savoy, not here." Poirot noted Lang's left-handed grip on his pen, a detail that aligned with the slash wound's angle. "And this handkerchief, monsieur? Ink or something more sinister?" Lang flushed. "Ink, I swear. Someone's framing me to hurt Amelia." As evening fell, the manor's lights flickered, a storm brewing over the hills. Poirot gathered the household for dinner, observing their interactions. Victor drank heavily, his bravado crumbling. Amelia clung to Lang's arm, her eyes haunted. Margaret remained aloof, her gaze distant. Thorne, invited reluctantly, sat apart, his hostility palpable. Suddenly, a power outage plunged the manor into darkness, the storm's first rumble shaking the windows. A gasp, a scuffle, then silence. When the lights returned, a chair was overturned and a window stood ajar. Poirot's sharp eyes caught a glint in the carpet. A cufflink, etched with the serpent crest, identical to a pair Victor owned. "Stolen," Victor protested, his voice hoarse. "I lost those weeks ago." Japp bagged the cufflink, muttering, "Another plant, or are you just careless, Blackwood?" Poirot's mind raced. The cufflink, the handkerchief, the glove, all distractions, yet each pointed to a deeper truth. The killer was among them, orchestrating chaos to obscure their path. As the storm lashed the manor, Poirot heard a faint hum from the foundry. A vibration, not a toll, as if a bell had been struck lightly. He stepped to the window, peering into the night. The bell tower was dark, but a shadow moved, fleeting, gone. "The killer taunts us," Poirot said, his voice low. "But Hercule Poirot is not so easily deceived. Tomorrow we tighten the net." Chapter 5. Whispers from the Past. The storm that had battered Ashford Hollow through the night relented by morning, leaving a sky bruised with clouds, and the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and coal ash. St. Mary's Bell Foundry stood as a sombre sentinel, its blackened walls glistening under a weak sun. The village, still gripped by the shock of Reginald Blackwood's murder, whispered of ghosts and curses. The serpent-etched clapper found in his lifeless hand, fueling tales of vengeance from a bygone era. Hercule Poirot, undaunted by the gloom, stood in the Blackwood Manor's library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound tomes and the faint must of forgotten secrets. His green eyes, sharp as cut glass, scanned the shelves, seeking answers in the shadows of the past. Inspector Japp, ever the pragmatist, hovered nearby, his notebook worn from furious scribbling. "These theatrics, the cufflink, the handkerchief," Japp grumbled, adjusting his tie. "Someone's playing a game, Poirot, and I'm tired of chasing shadows. What's your angle?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile curling beneath it. "Mon cher Japp, the game is precisely the point. The killer weaves a tapestry of misdirection, but Hercule Poirot sees the threads. The past it speaks to us if we listen. Let us consult the archives of Monsieur Blackwood." The library's shelves held more than books. They guarded the Blackwood legacy. Poirot pored over dusty ledgers and family records, his gloved fingers tracing faded ink. Reginald Blackwood, born to a blacksmith's family in 1870, had built an empire from molten bronze, his bells ringing in cathedrals from Westminster to Vienna. But a darker thread emerged. A disowned brother, Thomas Blackwood, banished in 1895 for forging guild documents to steal a contract. Thomas vanished, presumed dead, but whispers tied him to the serpent crest, a symbol of pride tainted by betrayal. "The serpent's return," Poirot murmured, recalling Elias Hawthorne's account of Reginald's cryptic mutterings. Was Thomas alive seeking revenge? A journal, tucked behind a volume of metallurgy, revealed more. Reginald had written of a bastard heir, a child born out of wedlock to Thomas, whose existence threatened the family's reputation. The serpent crest adorned a poison ring, a medieval relic Reginald kept locked in his study, rumoured to hold a deadly toxin. Yet the autopsy, shared by Japp, showed no poison, only the clean slash across Reginald's throat. "The ring, it is a symbol, not the method," Poirot mused. "But why the clapper fragment? To point us to this scandal?" Poirot summoned the household staff, seeking cracks in their stories. Clara, the sharp-eyed maid, stood rigid, her apron twisted in her hands. "The master was cruel," she admitted under Poirot's piercing gaze. "He dismissed my sister Mary last year, claimed she stole, but it was a lie. I stayed to support my family, but I hated him." Her resentment was palpable, a motive, but her slight frame and lack of access to the crypt weakened her as a suspect. "I never went down there," she insisted. "Too eerie." Poirot turned to Victor Blackwood, whose bloodshot eyes betrayed a sleepless night. Cornered in the drawing-room, he confessed to a gambling debt owed to a London mobster, one Reginald had vowed to settle. "Father said he'd pay it, but only if I swore off the tables," Victor said, his voice bitter. "I told him to go to hell. But kill him? No. I needed him alive to save me." A red herring surfaced, a receipt for a train to London on the night of the murder. But it was unstamped, unverified. Amelia, delicate in a grey dress, clutched her locket as she faced Poirot. "Papa locked away my dowry," she said, tears brimming. "He said Edward was a leech, that he'd ruin us. We planned to elope, but I never told Papa. He'd have stopped us." Her alibi, dinner at the Savoy, held, but Poirot noted her hesitation when asked about Edward Lang's whereabouts after midnight. "He walked me home," she said, then faltered. "I mean, to my friend's flat." Margaret Blackwood, the widow, remained an enigma. "Reginald kept his burdens private," she told Poirot, her voice steady, but her eyes distant. "He'd been meeting someone in secret. Letters arrived, burned in the fireplace. I thought it was business, but now—" Her composure hinted at knowledge withheld, a motive veiled by grief. Poirot's methodology shone. He cross-referenced timelines, alibis, and motives in a pocket notebook, eliminating impossibilities. Victor's debt suggested desperation, but his absence was unconfirmed. Amelia's affair pointed to defiance, yet her fragility seemed genuine. Clara's resentment burned, but lacked means. Margaret's silence was a puzzle, her access to the study and the missing dagger troubling. Silas Thorne's alibi, though strong, wavered in the youngest apprentice's hesitation. A false clue emerged, a letter found in Reginald's desk, unsigned, demanding reparations for past sins. Its ink matched the stain on Edward Lang's handkerchief, but chemical analysis, rushed by Japp, confirmed it as ink, not blood. "Another distraction," Poirot said, his voice low. "The killer plants seeds of doubt, but we seek the root." Poirot returned to the foundry, drawn to the crypt's oppressive silence. The ventilation grate, its bolts loosened, nagged at him. Kneeling, he listened. A faint whisper, like breath through the stone. "Words or wind?" he murmured. Tapping the grate, he found it hollow behind. A possible hiding place or a listening post. "The killer knows this place intimately," he told Japp. "They move unseen, unheard." Midday brought a new lead. Elias Hawthorne, questioned again, recalled a detail. The master was in the crypt often, checking moulds. But last week he seemed afraid, kept looking over his shoulder, locked the door even when alone. Elias's own rounds placed him near the crypt at 10 p.m., the estimated time of death. But he swore he saw nothing. Poirot's mind raced, weaving clues, the serpent clapper, the missing dagger, the tampered grate. The murder's precision suggested planning, the lack of struggle trust. He hypothesized a left-handed killer, based on the slash's angle. But Victor was ambidextrous, Thorne left-handed, and Lang's writing hand unconfirmed. A mirror, perhaps, used to stage the wound's appearance. The thought lingered, unformed. As evening approached, Poirot requested a map of the foundry, studying its labyrinthine layout. A groundskeeper mentioned an old rumour. A hidden passage linking the crypt to the manor's cellar, used by monks centuries ago. Intrigued, Poirot descended to the manor's cellar, a dank maze of barrels and cobwebs. His lantern caught a seam in the stone wall, barely visible. With Japp's help, he pressed it, and a panel groaned open, revealing a narrow tunnel, its air stale and heavy with dust. The passage stretched toward the foundry, its floor littered with bell shavings, recent, gleaming faintly. "Someone used this," Poirot said, his voice echoing. "Entry and exit, unseen." Footprints in the dust, fresh but smudged, led both ways. "The killer or a witness?" Japp asked. Poirot knelt, examining the shavings. Bronze from a recent casting. Monsieur Thorne, perhaps, or someone framing him. The tunnel ended at a trapdoor beneath the crypt, concealed by a mould crate. "This changes all," Poirot said. The locked door was a lie. The killer had another way. Back in the manor, tension simmered. Victor drank heavily, Amelia wept quietly, and Margaret watched with icy calm. Clara, caught lingering near the cellar, claimed she was fetching wine. I didn't know about no passage," she said, but her eyes darted nervously. As night fell, the storm's remnants grumbled in the distance. Poirot stood in the crypt, lantern raised, the tunnel's discovery shifting the puzzle. The killer had planned meticulously, using the passage to strike and vanish. But why the clapper? Why the serpent? Suddenly, a faint hum vibrated through the crypt. Not a toll, but a resonance, as if a bell had been brushed. Poirot froze, listening. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, echoed from the tunnel. He raised his lantern, but the sound ceased, leaving only silence and the weight of unseen eyes. "The killer is near," Poirot whispered, his heart steady but his mind ablaze. "And Hercule Poirot will find them. Chapter 6. The Hidden Passage. The discovery of the hidden passage beneath St. Mary's Bell Foundry sent ripples of unease through Ashford Hollow, as if the very stones of the crypt whispered secrets too long buried. The morning of the third day since Reginald Blackwood's murder dawned cold, the sky a leaden expanse over the 1935 English countryside. The foundry, its furnaces still dormant, loomed like a silent judge, its bell tower casting a long shadow across the frost-kissed yard. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat buttoned against the chill, stood at the crypt's entrance, lantern in hand, his green eyes alight with the thrill of a puzzle deepening. Inspector Japp, rubbing his hands for warmth, followed close behind, his scepticism tempered by grudging respect for Poirot's uncanny instincts. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice resonant in the crypt's dank air. "This passage, it is the key to the killer's dance." They entered unseen, struck with precision, and vanished like a phantom. But phantoms leave traces, and Hercule Poirot will find them. The tunnel, discovered the previous evening, stretched from the manor's cellar to the crypt, a narrow vein of stone and shadow. Its walls, rough-hewn by medieval monks, glistened with moisture, and the air carried the faint tang of bronze shavings scattered on the floor. Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers sifting through the dust. The shavings were fresh, their edges glinting in the lantern's glow. "Recent work," he murmured. "From the foundry, oui, but whose hand scattered them? Monsieur Thorne, perhaps, or a clever misdirection?" Japp peered into the tunnel's gloom. "This changes everything, Poirot. The locked crypt door was a ruse. Anyone with access to the manor could have used this to get in and out. But who knew about it?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "That, mon cher, is the question. The passage is a secret, but secrets are shared. By family, by servants, by enemies. We must tighten the net." They emerged into the manor's cellar, where Clara, the maid, was questioned anew. Her sharp eyes widened at the mention of the passage. "I swear, monsieur, I didn't know it existed," she said, twisting her apron. "I clean the cellar, but it's just barrels and cobwebs. The master never mentioned no tunnel." Her resentment toward Reginald Blackwood, who had dismissed her sister, burned in her voice, but her slight frame and lack of foundry knowledge weakened her as a suspect. Yet Poirot noted her nervous glance toward the cellar stairs. A hint of something withheld? The detectives' inquiries returned to the suspects, their alibis fraying like worn bell ropes. Victor Blackwood, summoned to the drawing-room, paced with the agitation of a man teetering on ruin. His bloodshot eyes and rumpled suit spoke of sleepless nights and too much whiskey. I told you, I was in London," he snapped when Poirot pressed his whereabouts. "The Raven Club, till dawn. But that glove with my initials, someone's framing me, I swear it." Poirot's gaze was unyielding. "And this passage, Monsieur Victor, did you know of it?" Victor hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Father mentioned old tunnels once, said they were sealed. I thought it was just stories." His ambidextrous hands, capable of the left-handed slash that killed his father, drew Poirot's scrutiny. But Victor's denial rang with a note of truth. Or was it fear? Amelia Blackwood, fragile in a pale blue dress, sat by the fire, her locket clutched like a talisman. "I never went near the crypt," she insisted, her voice trembling. "Edward and I were in London dining at the Savoy, but Papa, he was secretive lately, locking himself in his study, burning letters." Her alibi held, confirmed by friends, but Poirot noted her reluctance to discuss Edward Lang's movements after their dinner. "He walked me to my friend's flat," she said, then faltered, "and I don't know where he went after." Silas Thorne's alibi, once solid, showed cracks. Poirot and Japp revisited his workshop, where the burly artisan hammered a bell mould with controlled fury. "I told you I was here," Thorn growled when questioned about the passage. "My apprentices saw me till midnight." But the youngest apprentice, Tom, under Poirot's gentle probing, admitted a lapse. "Mr. Thorn stepped out for an hour, maybe 10 to 11, he mumbled, avoiding his master's glare. "Said he needed air." Thorn's scowl deepened, the scar on his left hand stark in the gaslight. "A walk, that's all," he said. "Needed to clear my head after a row with a supplier. I didn't go near Blackwood's crypt." The timing, however, placed him dangerously close to the murder's window. Poirot's mind churned, cross-referencing clues. The serpent clapper, the missing dagger, the bronze shavings in the tunnel. The murder's precision suggested a killer familiar with the foundry's layout, and the passage expanded the list of suspects. Clara had access to the cellar, Victor and Amelia to the manor, Thorn to the foundry's tools. Margaret Blackwood, the widow, remained an enigma, her silence a shield. Reginald kept his own counsel, she told Poirot, her grey eyes unreadable. He spoke of enemies, old debts, but never names. I stayed in my chambers that night, alone. A new clue surfaced. A groundskeeper, questioned by Jap, recalled seeing a light in the foundry yard near the bell tower, moments before the unauthorized toll 2 nights prior. "Thought it was Elias doing rounds," he said, "but it moved too quick, like someone sneaking." The footprint Poirot had found, smudged in the mud, aligned with this account, but its size was inconclusive. Poirot's methodology was relentless. He sketched timelines in his notebook. Reginald died between 10 and 11 p.m., based on the autopsy's rigor mortis. Victor's London alibi was unverified. Amelia's solid but incomplete. Thorn's weakened. Clara's plausible but unproven. The dagger, serpent-carved and missing from the study, remained the likely weapon, its absence a deliberate taunt. The slash's angle suggested a left-handed killer, but mirrors or staging could deceive. Poirot hypothesized a rehearsal. Had the killer practiced in the crypt, leaving shavings behind? Edward Lang, Amelia's journalist lover, arrived at the manor, his charm tinged with defiance. "I had no love for Blackwood," he admitted, his dark eyes meeting Poirot's. "He threatened to ruin my career over a story I wrote. Claimed I plagiarized, which was nonsense. But I was with Amelia, not here." His left-handed pen grip caught Poirot's attention, aligning with the wound's angle. "And the handkerchief?" Poirot asked. "Ink, you say?" "Ink," Lang insisted. "Someone planted it to frame me, to hurt Amelia." His sincerity was convincing, but Poirot sensed a guarded edge. As dusk fell, the manor's Gothic halls grew oppressive, shadows pooling in corners. Poirot requested a second inspection of the passage, descending with Jap into its claustrophobic depths. The bronze shavings, scattered deliberately, suggested recent activity. Perhaps the killer's escape, or a staged clue. A faint scratch on the tunnel wall caught Poirot's eye. A mark barely visible, resembling the serpent crest. "Intentional or accidental?" he murmured, tracing it with a gloved finger. Back in the crypt, Poirot examined the ventilation grate again, its loose bolts a lingering puzzle. He tapped it, hearing a hollow echo. "A listening post, perhaps," he said to Jap. "Or a way to signal." The whispers he'd heard, real or imagined, haunted him, suggesting the killer was close, watching. The household gathered for dinner, tension crackling like the fire in the hearth. Victor drank heavily, his bravado crumbling. Amelia clung to Lang, her eyes darting nervously. Margaret watched with icy calm, her silence louder than words. Clara served, her movements stiff, avoiding Poirot's gaze. Thorn, invited to unsettle him, sat apart, his hostility a tangible force. Suddenly, a power outage plunged the manor into darkness, the storm's remnants rumbling outside. A crash echoed, a tray dropped, Clara's gasp piercing the silence. When the lights flickered on, a window stood ajar and a chair was overturned. Poirot's sharp eyes spotted a glint in the rug. Another serpent-edged cufflink, twin to the one found earlier. Victor paled. "I told you they were stolen," he protested. "Weeks ago from my room," Japp begged the cufflink, muttering. "Either you're careless, Blackwood, or someone's got it in for you." Poirot's mind raced. The cufflink, like the glove and handkerchief, was too convenient, a deliberate misdirection. But by whom? As the household dispersed, Poirot lingered in the drawing-room, his notebook open. The passage, the shavings, the serpent marks, all pointed to a killer intimate with the Blackwood legacy. The unauthorized bell toll, the shadowy figure, taunts or errors. He closed his eyes, his little grey cells weaving a pattern. Trust betrayed, a family secret, a calculated strike. Outside, a low hum vibrated from the foundry. Not a toll, but a resonance, as if a bell had been brushed. Poirot rushed to the window, peering into the night. The bell tower was dark, but a flicker of movement caught his eye. A cloaked figure vanishing into the fog. "The killer moves," he whispered, his voice steady but his heart racing. And Hercule Poirot follows. Chapter 7. Cufflinks and Confessions. The fourth day since Reginald Blackwood's murder dawned over Ashford Hollow with a brittle clarity, the fog lifting to reveal St. Mary's Bell Foundry in stark silhouette against the 1935 English countryside. The village, steeped in unease, whispered of the serpent-edged clapper, the hidden passage, and the ghostly tolls that haunted the night. The manor, its Gothic spires piercing a sky streaked with clouds, stood as a monument to secrets, its halls heavy with the weight of suspicion. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat pristine despite the damp, stood in the manor's drawing-room, the serpent-edged cufflink found in the previous night's chaos glinting in his gloved hand. Inspector Japp, pacing nearby, muttered about the mounting evidence, his patience fraying like a worn rope. "Another cursed trinket, Poirot," Japp said, gesturing to the cufflink. "Victor's initials again, just like the glove. Either he's the sloppiest murderer in England, or someone's got a vendetta." Poirot's green eyes sparkled, his moustache twitching with a faint smile. "Mon cher Japp, the killer plays a game of shadows, planting clues to obscure the truth." But Hercule Poirot sees through the mist. "This cufflink, it is not evidence of guilt, but of intent. To divide, to confuse. We must look deeper." The cufflink, identical to one found earlier, was claimed by Victor Blackwood as stolen from his room weeks prior. "I swear it," Victor protested, his voice hoarse with desperation, his face haggard from sleepless nights and too much whiskey. "Someone's framing me, Thorne maybe, or that journalist Lang. They're out to ruin me." His ambidextrous hands, capable of the left-handed slash that killed his father, trembled as he poured another drink, the glass clinking against the decanter. Poirot turned to the assembled household. Amelia, pale and fragile, clutching her locket. Margaret, the widow, her composure a mask of steel. Clara, the maid, lingering nervously at the room's edge. And Edward Lang, newly arrived, his journalist's charm tinged with defiance. Silas Thorne, summoned from his workshop, stood apart, his burly frame radiating hostility. The air crackled with tension, the fire in the hearth casting flickering shadows across the ornate rugs. "Monsieur Victor," Poirot began, his voice smooth yet commanding. "Your cufflinks, they vanish, yet reappear at moments most convenient for suspicion. Tell me, who had access to your room?" Victor's eyes darted to Clara. "The servants, I suppose. Clara's always in and out, cleaning. But I'm no killer. I was in London at the Raven Club." Poirot's gaze shifted to Clara, whose sharp eyes widened. "I clean, monsieur, but I don't steal," she said, her voice trembling. "I saw something, though. Night of the murder, I heard voices in the cellar near where you found that passage. Thought it was rats. But then I saw Mr. Thorne arguing with the master earlier that day, through the study window. He was furious, shouting about stolen designs." Thorne's scowl deepened, the scar on his left hand stark in the firelight. I argued with Blackwood," he admitted, his voice rough. "He owed me years of my work stolen for his glory. But I left him alive, went back to my workshop. My apprentices'll tell you," the crack in his alibi, revealed by the youngest apprentice's confession of a brief absence, hung unspoken, a shadow over his words. Poirot's little grey cells hummed, weaving a tapestry of motives and opportunities. Victor's gambling debts owed to a London mobster suggested desperation, but his unverified alibi weakened his defence. Amelia's affair with Edward Lang, opposed by her father, hinted at rebellion, though her Savoy dinner was confirmed. Margaret's silence concealed knowledge, her access to the study and the missing serpent-carved dagger troubling. Clara's resentment, fueled by her sister's dismissal, lacked means but not intent. Thorne's hatred, rooted in professional betrayal, burned bright, his left-handedness aligning with the murder's method. Lang, the outsider, faced blackmail from Reginald over a plagiarized article, his left-handed writing noted by Poirot. A red herring surfaced. The bloody glove with Victor's initials, analysed by Japp's team, bore no fingerprints. "Planted post-mortem," Poirot declared. "The killer wishes us to chase phantoms, but we seek substance." The cufflink, similarly, lacked prints, its placement deliberate, a taunt, not evidence. Poirot's methodology was relentless. He cross-referenced timelines, noting Reginald's death between 10 and 11 p.m. The passage, accessible from the manor, expanded suspects. Clara cleaned the cellar. Victor and Amelia lived there. Margaret controlled the study. Thorne's workshop, a mile away, was less likely. But his knowledge of bell crafting and bronze shavings in the tunnel kept him in play. Lang's presence in London was solid, but his movements after midnight unclear. The detective revisited the crypt, its air heavy with damp and secrets. The ventilation grate, its bolts loosened, whispered of surveillance. Poirot tapped it, hearing a hollow echo. "A listening post," he said to Japp. The killer heard, perhaps saw, Blackwood's final moments. The bronze shavings, scattered in the passage, suggested recent activity, Thorne's work or a frame. A new lead emerged. A servant reported a burned letter in the study's fireplace, its fragments illegible, but bearing the serpent crest. Reginald was secretive, Margaret admitted when pressed. "He burned correspondence weekly, said it was business. I didn't pry." Her reserve, Poirot sensed, masked a deeper truth. Amelia's fragility cracked under questioning. "Papa threatened to expose Edward's past," she confessed, tears streaming. "A story he wrote years ago. Papa called it stolen. Edward was furious, but he'd never kill." Her defence wavered, her eyes avoiding Lang's. Lang, confronted in the library, bristled. "Blackwood was a bully," he said, his dark eyes flashing. "He'd have ruined my career, but I was with Amelia, not here. Check the Savoy's guest book." His left-handed grip on his pen, noted earlier, lingered in Poirot's mind, a piece of the puzzle yet to fit. As evening fell, the manor's halls grew oppressive. shadows lengthening like fingers. Poirot announced a reconstruction, gathering all in the crypt to recreate the murder's night. "We shall see," he said, his voice low, "who flinches, who reveals." Lanterns cast flickering light, the chalk outline of Blackwood's body stark against the stone. Poirot dimmed the lights, plunging the crypt into near darkness, the air thick with anticipation. "Imagine," he said, pacing, "Monsieur Blackwood, alone, inspecting moulds. The killer enters, through the passage perhaps, trusted, unseen. The dagger strikes swift, precise. The clapper is placed, a symbol of betrayal. Who among you could move so silently?" Victor shifted, his breath uneven. Amelia clutched Lang's arm, her eyes wide. Clara trembled, her gaze on the floor. Thorne stood rigid, his scar a pale slash. Margaret's face was unreadable, her hands folded tightly. A sudden movement, a shadow in the passage's mouth. A figure lunged, dagger raised, its blade glinting in the lantern's glow. Japp tackled it, the weapon clattering to the stone. The figure was Clara, her face contorted with fear, not malice. "I didn't kill him," she cried as Japp restrained her. "I only wanted to scare you off, make you leave this cursed place." The dagger was a prop, blunt from the manor's display. Clara sobbed, her confession tumbling forth. "I heard the master talking about his will in the study. He said he'd leave something to my family. Reparations for my sister's dismissal. I thought, if I scared you, you'd stop digging." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And the voices in the cellar, Mademoiselle Clara?" "The passage?" "I heard them, but I didn't see," she said, trembling. "I swear, I didn't know about the passage till you found it." The household exhaled, chaos subsiding. Poirot dismissed Clara, his mind racing. Her act was desperate, not murderous. But her confession confirmed the passage's use. The killer had manipulated her fear, using her as a pawn. The true culprit remained, their motives clearer. The dagger stolen from the study. The clapper, a family symbol. The passage, a hidden artery. As midnight neared, a bell tolled erratically from the foundry. A stuttering, deliberate rhythm. Poirot's ears pricked. "Morse code," he said, decoding silently. "Betrayal." The word hung in the air, a chilling accusation. Who signalled and to whom? The crypt's shadows deepened, and Poirot sensed the killer's presence, a heartbeat away, their next move imminent. Chapter 8. The Reconstruction Unravels. The 5th day since Reginald Blackwood's murder broke over Ashford Hollow with a sky heavy as iron, the air sharp with the promise of rain. St. Mary's Bellfoundry stood silent, its furnaces cold, the village gripped by a fever of whispers. Tales of serpent symbols, hidden passages, and the erratic tolling of bells that seemed to mock the living. The Blackwood Manor, its Gothic spires clawing at the clouds, was a crucible of tension, its halls echoing with the weight of secrets yet to be unearthed. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat pristine despite the damp, stood in the crypt beneath the foundry, where Clara's dramatic confession during the previous night's reconstruction had shifted the investigation's tide. Inspector Japp, rubbing his temples, stood beside him, the serpent-edged prop dagger now bagged as evidence, though its blunt edge marked it as no murder weapon. "Clara's stunt nearly gave me a heart attack," Japp grumbled, his notebook bulging with scribbled clues. "But she's no killer, just a frightened girl. We're still chasing ghosts, Poirot." Poirot's green eyes gleamed, his moustache twitching with purpose. "Non, mon cher Japp, we chase a mind, cunning and deliberate. Clara was a pawn, manipulated to disrupt our focus. The true killer used her fear, as they use these clues, the glove, the cufflink, the handkerchief, to weave a web of confusion. But Hercule Poirot sees the pattern." The crypt's air was heavy with damp, and the faint tang of bronze. The chalk outline of Blackwood's body, a stark reminder of the crime's brutality. Clara's outburst had revealed her overhearing Reginald's will discussion, hinting at reparations for her dismissed sister. A motive, but not for murder. Her knowledge of voices in the cellar, tied to the hidden passage, confirmed its use. But her denial of entering it rang true. The killer, Poirot deduced, was someone with intimate access to the manor and foundry, exploiting the passage's secrecy. Poirot gathered the household in the manor's drawing-room, the fire casting flickering shadows across the ornate rugs. Victor Blackwood slouched in an armchair, his face haggard, a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. Amelia, pale as moonlight, sat beside Edward Lang, her locket clutched tightly. Margaret Blackwood, the widow, stood by the window, her grey eyes distant yet watchful. Silas Thorne, summoned from his workshop, leaned against the wall, his burly frame radiating defiance. Clara, red-eyed from her ordeal, lingered at the room's edge, her apron twisted in her hands. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice a blade of clarity. "The reconstruction has illuminated much. Mademoiselle Clara sought to frighten, not to kill, but her act reveals a truth. The killer moves among us, using fear as a weapon. The passage, the serpent clapper, the missing dagger, these are not accidents, but a symphony of intent. Let us unravel it." Clara, questioned first, reiterated her story. "I heard the master in his study talking of his will," she said, her voice quavering. "He mentioned my sister, said he'd make things right. I thought, if I scared you off, the truth would stay buried." Her confession, Poirot noted, was genuine but incomplete. Someone had stoked her panic, perhaps whispering of exposure. Victor, his temper frayed, slammed his glass down. "This is madness. First my glove, now my cufflinks. Someone's framing me. I was in London, I tell you." His unverified alibi, a train receipt without a stamp, weakened under scrutiny. Poirot's gaze lingered on Victor's ambidextrous hands, capable of the left-handed slash that killed his father. "And the passage, Monsieur Victor? You knew of it, oui?" Victor's eyes flickered. "Father spoke of old tunnels, but I never saw them. If I'd known, I'd have told you." His denial was vehement, but Poirot sensed fear beneath it. Amelia's fragility cracked as Poirot turned to her. "Papa was cruel about Edward," she admitted, tears brimming. "He locked my dowry away, said Edward was a fraud. But I was in London, at the Savoy." Her alibi held, but her hesitation about Edward's movements after midnight persisted. "He left me at my friend's flat," she said, her voice faltering. "I don't know where he went after." Edward Lang, his journalist's charm strained, bristled under Poirot's scrutiny. "Blackwood was a tyrant," he said, his dark eyes flashing. "He threatened to ruin me over a story, claimed it was plagiarized, which was a lie. But I was with Amelia, not here." His left-handed pen grip, noted earlier, aligned with the murder's method. But his alibi was partially corroborated by the Savoy's guest book. Margaret, questioned next, maintained her icy reserve. "Reginald kept his secrets," she said, her voice steady. "He burned letters, met strangers at odd hours. I thought it was business, but now I wonder." Her access to the study, where the serpent-carved dagger was stolen, made her a quiet but potent suspect. Silas Thorne's alibi, already weakened, faced new pressure. "I told you, I argued with Blackwood that day," he growled, his scarred left hand clenching. "He offered hush money, £500 to drop my lawsuit over the designs he stole. I took it, left him alive, went back to my workshop." The youngest apprentice's admission of Thorne's hour-long absence placed him near the murder's window, but no direct evidence linked him to the crypt. Poirot's little grey cells churned, cross-referencing clues. The passage lined with bronze shavings. The serpent clapper, a deliberate symbol. The dagger still missing. The glove and cufflinks, planted without fingerprints, were red herrings, designed to fracture trust. The erratic bell toll, signalling betrayal in Morse, suggested a killer taunting their pursuers. The passage's use pointed to someone with manor access. Victor, Amelia, Margaret, or Clara, though Thorne's foundry knowledge and Lang's motive kept them in play. A new clue surfaced. A groundskeeper reported finding a scrap of fabric in the passage, torn from a coarse wool coat, unlike the fine garments of the Blackwood family. "Could be Thorne's," Japp said, holding the scrap. "His workshop's full of rough coats like this." Thorne denied it, claiming his coat was intact, but a quick inspection revealed a missing patch on his sleeve. Torn in a casting accident, he insisted, his scowl deepening. Poirot's methodology was relentless. He reconstructed timelines in his notebook. Reginald died between 10 and 11 p.m., the passage providing unseen access. Victor's London alibi remained unverified. Amelia's solid but incomplete. Thorne's cracked. Lang's partially confirmed. Clara's plausible. Margaret's unprovable. The left-handed slash suggested Thorne or Lang, but Victor's ambidexterity and a possible mirror trick kept him viable. The detective returned to the crypt, its oppressive silence amplifying his thoughts. The ventilation grate, loosened for listening or signalling, whispered of a killer's intimacy with the foundry. The bronze shavings, deliberately scattered, suggested a frame. Thorne's work or a mimicry? Poirot traced the passage again, finding a faint scratch on the trapdoor's hinge. A serpent's curve etched with care. "A signature," he murmured, "or a taunt." Back at the manor, Poirot requested Reginald's financial records, suspecting the hush money Thorne mentioned. A ledger found in the study showed a payment of £500 to an unnamed recipient, dated the day of the murder. Thorne spoke truth, Poirot said to Japp, but was it payment or bait? As evening fell, the manor's halls grew heavy with anticipation. Poirot gathered the household for another session, probing deeper. Amelia broke, sobbing. "Edward was angry that night, but he'd never kill. He left me at the flat, said he had business." Her words, unguarded, hinted at Lang's unreported movements. Lang, confronted, admitted a partial truth. "I met a contact in London, a source for a story," he said, his voice tight. "Nothing to do with Blackwood. I was back at my hotel by midnight." His alibi, unchecked, wavered. Victor's temper flared. "You're all against me," he shouted, knocking over a chair. "My cufflinks, my glove, someone's setting me up." His desperation, Poirot noted, bordered on panic, a sign of guilt or fear. Suddenly, a low hum vibrated from the foundry. A resonance, not a toll, as if a bell had been brushed. Poirot rushed to the window, peering into the dusk. The bell tower was dark, but a flicker of movement caught his eye. A cloaked figure, darting toward the foundry's edge. Japp gave chase, but the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving only a scrap of paper in the mud. A note, scrawled in haste, reading, "The serpent strikes again." Poirot's heart quickened. "The killer is bold," he said, his voice low. "They challenge us, but Hercule Poirot accepts the challenge. The net tightens, and soon the truth will ring clear." Chapter 9. The Grey Cells Converge. The 6th day since Reginald Blackwood's murder cast a pall over Ashford Hollow, the sky a bruised expanse that mirrored the village's unease. St. Mary's Bell Foundry, its furnaces cold, stood as a silent witness to the crime, its bell tower looming like a sentinel In the 1935 English countryside, the manor, with its Gothic spires and shadowed halls, pulsed with tension, each occupant a thread in the intricate tapestry Hercule Poirot was weaving. The detective, his overcoat immaculate despite the damp, gathered the household in the manor's drawing-room, the chandelier casting a soft glow over the ornate rugs and polished oak. Inspector Japp stood by the fireplace, his notebook worn, his expression a mix of frustration and anticipation. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice a melody of precision, "we stand at the precipice of truth. The murder of Monsieur Blackwood is no act of passion, but a symphony of calculation. The serpent clapper, the hidden passage, the missing dagger, these are not mere clues, but notes in a score composed by a mind most cunning. Hercule Poirot's little grey cells have listened, and now they sing. The room was a tableau of nerves. Victor Blackwood slumped in an armchair, his whiskey glass empty, his face etched with desperation. Amelia, fragile as porcelain, clutching Edward Lang's hand, her locket glinting. Margaret, the widow, erect and unreadable, her grey eyes fixed on Poirot. Silas Thorne, leaning against the wall, his scarred left hand clenched. Clara, the maid, hovering at the edge, her sharp eyes darting nervously. Edward Lang, the journalist, sat stiffly, his charm eroded by suspicion. The air crackled, the fire's embers hissing softly. Poirot paced, his cane tapping rhythmically. The crypt, it was chosen for its symbolism. A vault of secrets where the Blackwood legacy lies. The clapper, etched with the serpent crest, was placed to implicate the family. But why? To obscure or to reveal? The passage, known to few, allowed the killer to strike unseen. The dagger, stolen from the study, bears the same crest. These are not accidents, but deliberate strokes. He turned to Victor, whose bloodshot eyes widened. "Monsieur Victor, your debts to a London mobster, your unverified alibi, your ambidextrous hands capable of the left-handed slash. These paint a picture, no? Yet the glove and cufflinks, planted without fingerprints, suggest a frame. By whom?" Victor's voice cracked. "I told you, I was in London. Someone's setting me up, Thorne or Lang." His desperation, Poirot noted, bordered on panic, a sign of fear rather than guilt. Amelia's voice trembled as she spoke. "Papa was cruel, but I'd never harm him. Edward and I were at the Savoy, with friends." Her alibi held, but her hesitation about Lang's movements after midnight lingered. Poirot's gaze softened. "Mademoiselle, your love for Monsieur Lang, it is fierce, but does it blind you?" Margaret's composure held, but her hands tightened in her lap. "Reginald's secrets were his own," she said. "He burned letters, met strangers. I stayed in my chambers, alone." Her access to the study, where the dagger was stolen, made her a quiet threat. Thorne's scowl deepened. "I took Blackwood's money to drop my lawsuit," he admitted, his voice rough. £500 paid that day. I left him alive, went back to my workshop." The apprentice's confession of his hour-long absence weakened his alibi, and the torn coat scrap in the passage pointed to him, though he claimed a casting accident. Lang bristled under Poirot's scrutiny. "Blackwood threatened my career, yes, but I was with Amelia. The handkerchief, ink, not blood. Someone's framing me to hurt her." His left-handedness, noted earlier, aligned with the slash's angle, but his alibi was partially corroborated. Clara, questioned again, reiterated her story. I heard voices in the cellar, saw Thorn arguing with the master. I didn't kill him. I only wanted to scare you off." Her prop dagger stunt, Poirot deduced, was a desperate act, manipulated by another. Poirot's methodology shone. He cross-referenced timelines, motives and clues in his notebook. Reginald died between 10 and 11 p.m., the passage providing access. The glove, cufflinks and handkerchief were red herrings, planted to fracture trust. The bronze shavings in the passage suggested Thorn, but could be staged. The erratic bell toll, signalling betrayal in Morse, was a taunt. The dagger, still missing, was key. A revelation struck as Poirot reviewed Reginald's journal, found in the library. Entries spoke of a lost heir, tied to the disowned brother, Thomas Blackwood. A photograph, tucked in the journal, showed a young Thomas, his features eerily similar to Edward Lang's. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his little grey cells ablaze. "Monsieur Lang, you are no journalist, but the bastard heir, returned for vengeance and inheritance." Lang's face hardened, his charm dissolving. "Preposterous! I'm Edward Lang, born in Bristol, raised in London. Check my records." But Poirot's evidence mounted. The handkerchief's ink was tested, revealing traces of a rare poison, not used in the murder, but a failed attempt to frame Amelia. The passage's shavings matched Lang's access to foundry tools, borrowed for a supposed exposé. The left-handed slash, the serpent scratch in the passage, Lang's signatures. "Proof?" Japp demanded, his voice sharp. Poirot produced a hidden find, the serpent-carved dagger, recovered from Lang's luggage, its blade stained with Blackwood's blood, fingerprints intact. "You entered through the passage," Poirot said, his voice rising. "You confronted your brother Reginald, demanding your share. He refused, and you struck, placing the clapper to implicate the family. The glove, the cufflinks, you sowed chaos, but your poison attempt betrayed you." Lang lunged, his face contorted with rage, but Japp and a constable subdued him, cuffs snapping shut. "You've nothing!" Lang snarled, but his defiance crumbled under Poirot's gaze. Amelia sobbed, collapsing into Margaret's arms. Victor stared, stunned, his whiskey glass forgotten. Thorn's scowl softened, his rivalry irrelevant. Clara exhaled, her fear ebbing. Margaret's eyes glistened, her silence breaking. "I suspected something," she whispered. "Reginald spoke of a brother, but I never knew." The room exhaled, the chandelier's light steadying as the storm outside subsided. Poirot's deductions had unravelled the web. Lang, the illegitimate heir, had returned under a false identity, driven by resentment and greed. The passage was his path, the dagger his weapon, the clapper his misdirection. Red herrings, glove, cufflinks, handkerchief were his tools to fracture the household, while the bell's Morse code taunted his pursuers. Japp clapped Poirot's shoulder. "You've done it again, you little devil! How do you know?" Poirot's smile was modest. "The little grey cells, mon ami. They listen, they see, they know." He glanced at the window where the foundry's silhouette stood against the dusk. The truth, like a bell's chime, had rung clear. But one question lingered. Had Lang acted alone, or was another shadow waiting? As the household dispersed, Poirot lingered, his notebook open. The serpent's legacy was exposed, but the foundry's hum, faint in the distance, whispered of secrets yet to toll. The killer was caught, but the night held its breath, as if the crypt had one final tale to tell. Chapter 10. The Final Toll. The 7th day since Reginald Blackwood's murder dawned over Ashford Hollow with a fragile clarity, the sky a pale canvas streaked with wisps of cloud. St. Mary's Bellfounder, its furnaces still dormant, stood as a monument to a tragedy resolved. Yet the village remained hushed, as if the echoes of the crypt's secrets lingered in the 1935 English air. The Blackwood Manor, its Gothic spires softened by morning light, exhaled the tension that had gripped it for days. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat pristine and moustache immaculate, stood in the manor's garden, the scent of damp roses mingling with the faint tang of bronze from the foundry. Inspector Japp, his notebook finally closed, joined him, a rare smile breaking through his weathered features. "You've done it, Poirot," Japp said, clapping the detective's shoulder. Edward Lang or Thomas Blackwood's heir, whoever he is, cuffed and on his way to Scotland Yard. That was a devil of a puzzle, but your grey cells cracked it. Poirot's green eyes twinkled, his voice soft but resonant. "Mon cher Japp, the human soul. It rings with hidden tones like a bell. One must listen carefully to hear the truth. The killer played a cunning score, but Hercule Poirot conducts the final note." The drawing-room confrontation the previous night had unravelled the mystery. Lang, revealed as the illegitimate son of Thomas Blackwood, Reginald's disowned brother, had returned under a false identity, driven by resentment and a claim to the family legacy. The serpent-carved dagger, found in his luggage with Blackwood's blood and fingerprints, was the linchpin. The hidden passage, lined with bronze shavings, had been his path. The serpent-etched clapper, a deliberate misdirection to implicate the family. The glove, cufflinks, and handkerchief, planted to sow chaos, were his tools, while the bell's Morse code, signalling betrayal, was his taunt. Amelia's poisoned handkerchief, a failed attempt to frame her, sealed his guilt. His lunge at Poirot, subdued by Japp, was the final act of a desperate man. The manor's drawing-room, now bathed in morning light, was a scene of tentative relief. Victor Blackwood, his face less haggard, sat with a coffee cup, his whiskey forsaken. "I'm no saint," he admitted to Poirot, his voice low. "Father's threats to disinherit me pushed me to the edge, but I'd never kill him. I'll settle my debts, take the foundry forward." "He'd want that." Poirot nodded, noting Victor's resolve. "Monsieur Victor, the path to redemption, it is paved with action, not words. The foundry is yours. Ring it true." Amelia, her fragility softened by relief, sat beside Margaret, her locket open to reveal Edward Lang's miniature, now a bittersweet relic. "I loved him," she whispered, tears drying on her cheeks. "But he used me, lied to me. How could I not see?" Margaret, her composure softened, took her daughter's hand. "We were all blind, my dear. Reginald kept his secrets, and they cost him." Margaret's grey eyes met Poirot's, a flicker of gratitude in their depths. "You saw what we could not, Monsieur Poirot. Reginald's brother. I suspected a shadow from the past, but never this. Thank you." Clara, the maid, lingered in the hall, her sharp eyes brighter. Her prop dagger stunt, born of fear, had been a pawn's move in Lang's game. "I'm sorry, monsieur," she said, her voice steady. "I thought scaring you would protect my family. I was wrong." Poirot's gentle smile absolved her. "Courage, mademoiselle, is in facing the truth. You have done so." Silas Thorne, back at his workshop, sent word through an apprentice. "Tell the little Belgian I'm forging again," the note read. "Blackwood's gone, but my bells'll ring louder now." Poirot chuckled, sensing Thorne's rivalry tempered by respect. The scar on his left hand, once a suspect mark, was indeed from a casting accident, his alibi restored by the apprentice's full accounts. Poirot walked the foundry yard, his cane tapping the gravel. The bell tower, silent since the erratic tolls, stood as a testament to the case's resolution. The passage, now sealed by Japp's orders, would harbour no more phantoms. The serpent crest, a symbol of betrayal, was relegated to history, its venom drawn. The dagger, glove, cufflinks, and handkerchief, red herrings all, were catalogued as evidence, their purpose exposed. The detective's methodology, meticulous and unyielding, had prevailed. He reviewed his notebook one last time. Reginald's death, 10 to 11 p.m., via a left-handed slash. The passage's use confirmed by shavings and footprints. Lang's motive rooted in a denied inheritance. The bell's Morse code, a final taunt. Each clue, from the crypt's silence to the manor's shadows, had sung its part in the symphony of truth. As noon approached, Poirot boarded the train back to London, his suitcase light, but his mind heavy with reflection. The village receded, its rooftops fading into the hills. The human heart, he mused aloud, it is a bell, ringing with love, hate, betrayal. One must listen to its tone, its rhythm, to know its truth. The conductor, overhearing, smiled, unaware of the weight behind the words. Back in Ashford Hollow, the foundry stirred to life. Victor, newly resolute, oversaw the first casting since the murder, the furnaces roaring with renewed purpose. Amelia, freed from Lang's deception, began sketching designs for a memorial bell, her grief channeled into creation. Margaret, her reserve softened, opened Reginald's study to the family, burning no more secrets. The village, sensing closure, resumed its rhythm, the church bell tolling clear and steady, free of ghostly echoes. Poirot, gazing out the train window, saw the foundry's chimney in the distance, a faint plume rising. "The bells ring again," he said softly, "and justice, it chimes with them." The crypt's shadows were banished, the serpent's curse lifted, yet a faint hum lingered in his mind, a reminder that truth, like a bell's note, resonates long after it is struck. As the train pulled away, a final toll echoed from St. Mary's, a pure, resonant chime, carrying the promise of renewal. Poirot closed his eyes, his little grey cells at rest, the case a melody complete. Ashford Hollow would heal, its secrets laid bare, and Hercule Poirot, the conductor of truth, moved on to the next enigma, wherever it might ring.